I never imagined. When you hear those three words, what comes to the top of your mind immediately? Don't think about it. Don't take a pause. Something came right to mind. Well, today I was doing my spring Sunday walk and talk with God. I'm a mover and a shaker. I love to move. I love to be out in God's creation. And so on this beautiful spring day, Palm Sunday, I thought, I just want to take a walk and I want to talk to God and I want to pray. And on that walk, I had those three words come to me. I never imagined that on a Palm Sunday, one of the highest days of our Christian calendar, I, Janelle, would not be inside the four walls of a church waving palm branches. Sometimes I was dancing with palms back in the day, shouting to God, Hosanna in the highest, and doing that with a community of faith. Yet today I found myself on a walk, a beautiful walk of solitude and silence and prayer. And here I am. Now, right before COVID, my husband felt that we were to exit the church community we were in. Nothing harsh, no big alarms, nothing. It was just, it's time for us to go. I trust my husband. We mutually trust each other in our lives and in our parenting and our marriage and in our church involvement. And COVID came and went about 3 years, and here we still are. Yes, I know that one day we will be involved in a church community again, actively. But for now, for strategic reasons, I believe God has had us away on a pilgrimage from the familiar. And David White writes about burnout in this way. Burnout calls for creative breakdown, either in submitting to unconscious self-sabotage, the way that disasters large and small seem to track our exhausted, burned out self on a daily basis, the way we actually create those disasters unknowingly ourselves, trying to make a break for freedom or to create a conscious creative breakdown. Burnout is often as much the resistance to making these changes as being worn down by what we cannot seem to change. I have to repeat that. Being worn down by what we cannot seem to change. That's pivotal for me. I've been worn down by things I just didn't know how to change in my life. All the ways I find it impossible to leave the job, leave the relationship, all the ways I find it impossible to change my approach to work. I never imagined, because sometimes we can't imagine because we're so stuck in these grooves and these cycles in our neural pathways that perhaps they were grooved into us as children when we had no voice, no autonomy. Sometimes we don't know how to change, to get out of the way. He continues, or all the ways I need to simply learn to love again must be looked at and allowed to break down and fall away. They must be looked at, that's examine, and given the time and space to fall off of us, fall away. A lot of this happens, as he writes, unconsciously. It's in our subconscious. Breaking down, perhaps, the expensive life that holds me day after day a hostage to fortune. Burnout calls for stopping the conversation before it stops us. Burnout calls for stopping the conversation before it stops us. Well, I have to admit, the conversation, I didn't stop it. It stopped me. My body started to fall down and fall apart. And my nervous system, which is at the core of all of our dis-eases, said, Janelle, you need to stop. Burnout calls for a courageous claiming. I adore this sentence. I need to recognize that I do need a holiday, a break, a pilgrimage away from the familiar, and for much longer than anyone else will allow me. Wow. A pilgrimage away from the familiar, and for much longer than anyone else will allow me. I don't know what that speaks to you, but it really speaks so deeply to me, especially right now as we're pilgrimaging on this journey towards the aria of Easter, the holiest of times on our whole church calendar. And I feel like today I never imagined that God led me back to these words by David White. The pilgrimage away from the familiar. The familiar for me was going to church, being in a community of faith, worshiping God in certain ways, doing certain things, Bible teaching. I've been on the platform all over the world as keynote speaker, teaching God's word, inspiring people through God's word. I've played a part, you can say, and I think they were all honest and authentic. But God's called me away from all that, publishing, writing, all the familiar things that I've done for decades and decades, for such a time as this, longer than I would have even allowed myself, definitely longer than many people around me. When they say, well, where are you going to church? And I say, well, we're in the church of in between. We're not there yet. And you can see their nonverbal cues, and I hear them say, you should be in church. Yes, I know. But this pilgrimage away from the familiar and into the unfamiliar has been helping rewire my brain, my whole entire system, for perhaps a new work, a new way of living, a new way of moving through the world from a place of rest that I could never have imagined. I see this as an invitation to you and to me to perhaps reimagine something we could never imagine on our own. What might God have in store for you and for me that we could never imagine? I just pray today that you would join me this week. I feel like this is so fresh from my heart and from what I think I heard God say to me today, that He wants us to reimagine, what does He have for us that we could never imagine? Are we willing to trust God, put our hand in His hand, and trust Him like never before to show us what He has in store for us? Yeah. I wrote this quote on the back of what I just read to you. How many roads did St. Augustine follow until he became St. Augustine? How many roads have I had to follow until I become what God has really intended for me to be since He breathed His life into me? It's Palm Sunday. Let's reimagine together.